I heard her voice before I even reached the hallway, sharp enough to stop me in my tracks. "Family means nothing now," she said, each word clipped and cold. For a moment, I thought she was talking to someone on the phone, but when I stepped closer, I realized she was speaking in the living room, her back turned toward me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at the shadows on the wall and wondering how my own daughter could sound so distant. She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. I knew exactly who she meant. There was no anger in her voice, just a kind of tired dismissal that felt worse than rage. It hit me hard like a sudden drop in temperature. I stayed where I was, afraid she would notice me and twist her words into something lighter, something easier to swallow. Instead, I listened as she told whoever she was speaking to that she owed nothing to anyone and had her own life to manage. Each sentence tightened something inside me. I kept thinking I must have done something recently that I'd forgotten, something she misunderstood, but nothing came to mind. I stood there remembering how many years I spent working long hours, taking care of every bill, making sure she never felt the struggle I lived through. The confusion mixed with a deep, slow ache I wasn't prepared for. When she finally walked past the doorway and saw me standing there, she barely paused. She didn't smile. She didn't ask how long I'd been standing there. She just said she'd be out late and that I should rest before slipping on her coat. I watched her leave without saying a word. The door closed softly, but it still felt like something inside my chest slammed shut. I found myself wondering when she had stopped looking at me as her father and started seeing me as someone who got in the way. She'd been distant for months, moving through the house like a guest rather than someone who grew up in its rooms. She barely spoke to me unless she needed something done quickly. I walked into the kitchen, sat down at the small wooden table, and tried to make sense of what I had heard. The words replayed over and over. Family means nothing now. I tried to push them away, but they stuck to every quiet corner of the house. I remembered the nights I stayed awake helping her finish school applications, the weekends I spent fixing her car, the money I pulled from my savings so she wouldn't start adulthood buried in debt. I thought raising a child with love would mean something in the long run. I thought it would be enough. She had mentioned earlier in the week that she would handle things soon, but I didn't understand what she meant at the time. Tonight, for the first time, those words scared me. They felt like the start of something I wasn't prepared for. I turned on the porch light before heading to bed, the soft glow spreading across the yard. I don't know why I left it on. Maybe a part of me still hoped she didn't truly mean what she said. Maybe I just didn't want the house to feel as empty as it suddenly did. And I keep wondering, what would you feel if your child said family means nothing? I noticed the shift long before I understood it. It started with my daughter stopping by more often, but never to share a meal or sit with me the way we used to. She came through the door with a tight expression, glanced around the living room, and pointed out things she thought I was doing wrong. She told me I shouldn't drink coffee after noon, shouldn't sit on the back steps, shouldn't stay up late reading. Her visits felt less like love and more like inspection. Every remark carried the edge of someone evaluating a problem, not checking on a parent. I listened, nodding quietly, unsure when concern had turned into something sharper. One afternoon, I walked into my bedroom and found my belongings moved around. My watch box had been placed on a high shelf, the stack of letters on my desk shoved into a drawer, and my reading lamp unplugged. When I asked her why she did it, she said it was for safety, as if I had suddenly become a danger to myself. She didn't ask whether I wanted her help. She just acted, certain she knew better, certain I couldn't be trusted with my own things. I didn't argue, but something inside me felt smaller, as if the walls of my own home had shifted without warning. I began hearing from neighbors that she had stopped by their porches too. One of them, with kind eyes, asked gently if I was doing okay, because my daughter mentioned I had been slipping lately. The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know she was saying those things outside the house. I didn't know she was shaping a story about me before I even understood what she believed. It stung to realize she was planting doubt in others' minds while staying silent to mine. That quiet betrayal settled deep and heavy. Soon, she started answering my phone when she was visiting. If it rang, she picked it up before I could reach for it. Sometimes she told the caller I was resting. Other times, she simply said I was not up for talking today. I stood there listening, feeling erased by her voice, as if I was fading from my own life. She never handed me the phone to see who it was. She never asked whether I wanted to talk. It was easier, I suppose, to control the conversation when I didn't get the chance to speak. Then she brought her partner over, a man she said was good at organizing elders' lives. He walked through my living room with calm, assessing eyes, commenting on how my bills should be sorted and how my medicine bottles should be labeled. He didn't look at me when he said it. He spoke as if decisions were already made. Their confidence unsettled me, like they had stepped into a role I never offered. The first real warning came when I realized the mailbox felt emptier than usual. Weeks had passed since I'd seen a bank envelope. I brushed it aside at first, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I wasn't being cared for. I was being managed. And the difference cut deeper than I ever expected. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was from the bank, but the wording didn't match anything I expected. It mentioned a change in account activity, something about recent adjustments, and a reminder to review my previous request. I hadn't made any requests. I hadn't changed anything. I stood in the kitchen holding the paper, reading the lines again, feeling a dull ache of confusion settle across my chest. I asked my daughter when she stopped by, hoping she'd know what it meant. She barely looked at the letter before saying, "Dad, we already handled this. You don't need to stress yourself." Then she tossed it on the counter as if it were nothing, as if I couldn't possibly understand it. The dismissal didn't comfort me. It only made the room feel colder. Days later, I noticed something else. A drawer in my study that no longer opened. It had never been locked before. It held old checkbooks, receipts, and my insurance papers. I tugged gently at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I searched the house for the small key I kept years ago, but it was gone from its usual place. When I asked her about it, she said she didn't know what I meant, but her voice carried the same flat tone she used when she didn't want to explain something. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. That drawer held pieces of my life, and suddenly I was shut out of them. Her partner became more visible around that time too. He hovered near my desk when he visited, asking quiet questions about bank accounts, balances, and investments I hadn't touched in years. He spoke in a way that sounded helpful but felt intrusive, like he wasn't interested in me at all, only what I owned. He asked if I had updated my documents recently, but he didn't explain which documents he meant. Every sentence hinted at money, not memories, not health, not connection, just money. His presence left a knot in my stomach that tightened each time he paused near my files. I began writing things down, quietly and carefully. Dates of their visits, things they moved, letters that arrived, explanations that didn't make sense. I didn't tell them I was keeping track. It didn't feel safe to mention it. Each note felt like a small piece of truth I could hold on to, especially when everything else seemed to be drifting out of my control. It wasn't paranoia. It was self-preservation. As the weeks passed, the inconsistencies grew sharper. Statements didn't match what I remembered. Notifications mentioned account changes I never asked for. And whenever I raised a question, my daughter repeated the same line. "You already approved that." But I knew I hadn't. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't made any transfers. Something wasn't adding up. And the silence around those details felt heavier than anything I'd faced. The fear came quietly, almost like a whisper at the back of my mind. I began to wonder if someone was building something behind my back, something legal, something binding, something that could take my choices away. And for the first time, I felt the edges of betrayal forming, slow but unmistakable. Would these signs worry you? I knew something was wrong the moment I heard my daughter speaking to the doctor before I even entered the room. Her voice was low but firm, the kind people use when they want to sound responsible. She said I'd been confused lately, that I was forgetting simple things, and that she was worried about my safety. I stood outside the half-closed door, unable to move. She spoke as if I weren't even alive in the next hallway. When the doctor finally greeted me, there was a shadow of pity in his eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't based on anything I'd said or done. It came from the version of me she had already painted. Later that week, I tried to access my medical records online, something I'd done for years, but the system rejected my login. When I called the clinic, the nurse told me my access had been temporarily adjusted for my protection. She couldn't explain who approved the change. She couldn't even confirm if I still had full rights to my own information. I felt something inside me twist. My health, my history, My own body suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. One afternoon, she came by with a folder of papers and placed them on the table, telling me they were simple safety forms. She kept her tone light, almost cheerful, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. The forms were thick, full of fine print, and she pointed where she wanted me to sign. But when I looked closely, the language mentioned financial authority, decision-making rights, and legal permissions that didn't sound like safety at all. When I questioned one page, she sighed and said, "Dad, you're overthinking again. I promise it's all for your own good." Something about the way she rushed her words made the room feel smaller around me. Appointments started moving without my knowledge. I'd arrive at my usual time only to be told it had been rescheduled. I would miss letters from the clinic because they never reached my mailbox. More mail disappeared altogether. Bank updates, insurance notices, even simple reminders. At first, I thought maybe I misplaced them. Then I began to notice she was always the one who brought in the mail before I could reach the door. She said she was just being helpful, but her eyes scanned each envelope too quickly, as if she were checking for something. I found myself speaking differently when she was around. Shorter sentences, less detail. I avoided mentioning anything she could twist or repeat. I never talked about money or mail or my memory. I spoke like someone being monitored, not like a father speaking to his daughter. The change happened slowly, almost quietly, until one day I realized I didn't feel safe telling her anything personal at all. The worst part wasn't the paperwork or the appointments. It was the growing fear that the story she told about me, the confused, slipping old man, would become the only version anyone believed, that her words would be stronger than my voice, that I would disappear behind her narrative, one quiet step at a time. Would you see this as a red flag? I kept the porch light on every night, even when I knew she wasn't coming. It was an old habit, something I used to do when she was young and stayed late at school events. Back then, the light meant welcome, safety, warmth. Now it was something else, a quiet hope that maybe she would remember the home she grew up in and speak to me with the softness she once had. Most nights, I sat near the window and watched the light glow across the empty steps, trying to convince myself she didn't mean the things she had said. One evening, while tidying the drawer where she always left things scattered, I found a stack of papers she must have forgotten to take with her. At first, I assumed they were old receipts or reminders. Then, I saw the bank logo at the top. My heart sank as I flipped through the pages. They weren't simple statements. They showed activity I didn't recognize, withdrawals that didn't match anything I spent, transfers between accounts I didn't know existed, changes to settings I had never touched. Every line pulled me deeper into a cold realization. I looked closer and saw the name of her partner listed in small sections of the documents, linked as a beneficiary in one place, authorized in another. I don't remember signing anything that allowed that. I don't remember agreeing to any of it. A slow ache spread through my chest as I thought about all the times they reassured me that everything they did was to make things easier. It didn't look like ease. It looked like planning. I sat at the table with a pen and an old notepad, and for the first time, I decided to write everything down. Dates, conversations, changes I'd noticed but brushed off, missing mail, opened envelopes, appointments moved without my say. Line by line, the pattern that had been hiding in plain sight formed right in front of me, and once it formed, there was no unseeing it. It was no longer confusion. It was no longer doubt. It was something deliberate. The next morning, I went to the bank without telling anyone. I asked to speak to the manager privately, my hands shaking as I held my notebook. He looked through the documents with a seriousness that scared me more than any words my daughter had ever spoken. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't suggest I was mistaken. He asked careful questions and took his time reading each page. When he finally looked up, his expression told me everything. Something was wrong, very wrong, and I wasn't imagining it. Walking home afterward, I felt heavier than I had in years. The porch light was still on from the night before, casting its quiet circle of hope across the steps. But I knew hope alone couldn't protect me anymore. That evening, as I switched the light on again, I made a different promise to myself. I would protect what was left of my life, even if it meant protecting myself from my own daughter. The bank manager called me back 2 days after our quiet meeting. His voice was steady, but there was a seriousness behind it that made my stomach tighten. He asked if I could come in again, saying he had reviewed everything more closely. When I walked into his office, He closed the door behind us and laid the documents on the table one by one, as if preparing evidence in a case. He pointed to several irregularities, patterns of withdrawals, sudden permissions added, and transactions that didn't align with my usual spending. I could feel my throat dry as he explained what each one meant. Then he asked the question that cut straight through me. "Why is your daughter's name still active on this account?" I didn't know how to answer. I told him I thought it was temporary, something she said would help pay my bills during a difficult month. He shook his head gently, explaining that the permissions on the account weren't temporary at all. They were set up as if she had long-term authority. Hearing that out loud made my hands tremble on the arm of the chair. He told me they were opening an internal investigation. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It wasn't the kind of moment you see in movies with people rushing around. It was calm, professional, and heavy. He took out a form and asked me to recount everything: dates, changes, conversations. I pulled out the notebook I'd been keeping and read through the pages. Every detail I had written suddenly mattered in a way I hadn't expected. He listened without interrupting and made careful notes of his own. When I finished, he stepped out briefly and returned with another staff member who introduced herself as part of the bank's compliance team. She asked for copies of the statements I had found and any other documents showing changes I didn't authorize. Her questions were gentle but precise. With each one, I felt both exposed and supported, as if someone finally saw the truth I had been carrying alone. Later that afternoon, the bank formally notified Elder Protection Services. They didn't do it in front of me. They did it quietly, following their procedures, but they told me before I left. They said my situation met the criteria for suspected financial exploitation. The words felt heavier than anything I had heard in years. I wasn't expecting relief, but there it was, a deep breath I didn't know I had been denying myself. The next day, an elder protection caseworker called me. Her voice was calm, steady, and respectful. She asked if we could meet in person. When she arrived, she spread the documents across the dining table like pieces of a puzzle she already understood. After reviewing everything, she looked at me with the kind of seriousness you don't forget. She said the patterns were clear: coercion, unauthorized access, and signs of manipulation. I felt grief wash over me, not the loud kind, but a cold, quiet heaviness. I had suspected it, written it down, seen it on paper, but hearing a professional confirm it made the truth strike deeper. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't stress or miscommunication. It was something darker. As she packed her folder, she told me the investigation would move forward. When she left, I sat alone at the table for a long time, staring at the papers. The house felt different, heavier. The porch light outside still glowed against the evening, but its warmth didn't reach me. For the first time, I understood the full weight of what had been happening, and it was far worse than anything I had imagined. I asked her to come over late in the afternoon, when the house was quiet and the sun was low enough to soften the edges of the living room. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want raised voices. I just wanted the truth. When she walked in, she barely looked at me. She glanced around the room as if searching for judgment or danger, not her father. I laid the documents on the table: bank statements, forms with signatures that were not mine, notes from the investigation. My hands shook, but my voice stayed steady as I told her we needed to talk. She frowned before I finished the first sentence. "Dad, you're confused again," she said, stepping back as if the evidence itself was something she needed to avoid. I repeated myself, slower this time, pointing to each entry on the statement: the transfers, the changes in authority, the pattern that officials said was no accident. She crossed her arms and said she only did what I asked, and if I couldn't remember, that wasn't her fault. The words hit like a cold wind. It wasn't anger. It was her certainty that the lie could still stand. I showed her the timeline I had written in my notebook: dates, conversations, bank visits. She didn't look at the pages. Instead, she shook her head and said I always made things harder. Then she tried to shift the blame towards stress, bills, and her own responsibilities. She said I didn't understand how much pressure she was under. Each excuse sank deeper into me than the last, not because they were convincing, but because she said them without hesitation, as if rehearsed. Then her partner stepped forward from the doorway, where he had been waiting, silent and tense. He tried to explain the withdrawals, calling them temporary reallocations. He said they were helping me maintain stability and that I should be grateful. The arrogance in his voice made my chest tighten. I slid the official notice across the table The one confirming an investigation had been opened. The one outlining restrictions on both of them. His face drained of color. She picked up the page with shaking hands, scanning it as if searching for a loophole. "This is blown out of proportion," she whispered. "People exaggerate things. You don't know what you're doing anymore." But every excuse fell apart in front of the plain, typed words. No drama, no shouting, just facts she couldn't twist. 2 officials arrived shortly after to deliver the formal documents. Limitations on her access, warnings about continued involvement, and instructions for next steps. The room fell into a heavy silence. She didn't look at me, not once. She kept staring at the papers as if they had betrayed her, not the other way around. When they left, she stood in the doorway and finally spoke. I did what I had to do. No apology, no recognition of the damage. Just a flat statement, as if greed could be justified by convenience. That's when I understood something I had been trying to avoid. She made a choice, a deliberate one. She chose what she could take from me over what we once were. I walked her out without another word. The air outside was cool. The porch light was already glowing against the early evening. She didn't look back as she got into her car. When the engine faded down the street, I stood alone in the doorway, feeling the kind of heartbreak that doesn't shout. It just settles deep inside and becomes part of you. I closed the door slowly, the porch light still burning, waiting for a daughter who no longer existed. In the weeks after everything settled, my house became quiet in a way I hadn't heard in years. Not the empty kind of quiet that makes you feel unwanted, but a gentler one, like the world had finally stopped pressing in on me. I woke each morning without waiting for footsteps at the door or the sound of someone rearranging my life. I made my own breakfast, sorted my own mail, and walked into town for small errands. Simple routines, nothing extraordinary, yet they felt like a return to something I had thought was lost forever, my own dignity. There were days when I moved slowly through the house, noticing how much space grief can take up. The rooms hadn't changed, but I had. Trust, once broken, doesn't grow back the same way. It shifts, becomes cautious, more deliberate. I found myself thinking about aging in a different light, not as a weakness, but as a stage where clarity can cut deeper than youth ever allows. You begin to understand the cost of love. You learn that the people closest to you can hurt you in ways no stranger ever could. Some nights, I sat on the porch with the light glowing behind me, the same light I turned on every evening, even after she said family meant nothing. It became a symbol I didn't realize I was carrying, a small ritual of hope, even when hope felt foolish. I would sit there in the dark, listening to the wind and thinking about the daughter I once knew, the one who used to run into my arms without hesitation. That version of her is gone, but the memory still lives in the corners of my mind, no matter how much the present contradicts it. I learned something bitter but honest. Love does not prevent harm. It doesn't shield you from betrayal. Sometimes the people you raise carry different values into adulthood, and no amount of sacrifice can pull them back. Accepting that truth took time. It still hurts, like a bruise that never fully fades. But acceptance brought a quiet strength I didn't expect. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped asking what I could have done differently. I realized that protecting myself was not abandonment, it was survival. The officials still check in from time to time, making sure everything is resolved and safe. They speak to me with respect, something I had forgotten the feeling of when control was slipping from my hands. I keep my documents in order now, my accounts secured, my routine steady. I even found myself smiling one morning while watering the small plants on the porch. Life didn't return to what it was, but it became something I could stand in without fear. The porch light still turns on every night, but it means something different now. It isn't a beacon waiting for her return. It's a symbol that I am still here, still living, still choosing my own path, even with the scars she left behind. Some wounds remain open, others close slowly, but none erase the worth of the person who carries them. So I'll ask you, as I sit here in this quiet house that still holds every memory I earned and every tear I paid for, what would you have done in my place?